The North Atlantic, 1943. Cold, endless, deadly. A graveyard for ships and men alike. In the steel-gray dawn, the ocean looked calm, deceptively calm. But beneath those waves lurked death. A German U-boat, its hull painted black and silent, glided just beneath the surface. Inside the cramped metal tube, 40 men worked in suffocating silence. The air was thick with diesel and sweat. Every creak of the hull reminded them of the crushing pressure outside. Their commander, Kapitänleutnant Heinrich Wolf, leaned over the periscope, scanning the horizon. He'd been at sea for months, hunting Allied convoys that ferried supplies from America to Britain. Every ship they sank meant one less helping the enemy. Every torpedo they fired carried the weight of their war effort. But today, something felt different. Wolf adjusted the focus, his breath fogging the eyepiece. Through the mist, he saw them. Dark shapes on the horizon. A convoy. At least 12 merchant ships escorted by 3 warships. His heart pounded. "Targets," he whispered in German. The crew straightened instantly, trained by routine and fear. "Prepare tubes 1 and 2. The metallic echo of levers clanking filled the compartment. Men moved like ghosts in a factory of death. They knew the drill. Fast, precise, silent. The U-boat slid closer, hidden by the waves. Above them, the sound of propellers churned faintly. Wolf waited for the perfect moment. Every commander knew. One wrong decision and the hunters could become the hunted. On the surface, HMS Stalwart, a British destroyer, patrolled the edge of the convoy. Her sonar operator, Lieutenant Thomas Hale, sat with headphones pressed tight against his ears. The rhythmic ping of the sonar pulsed through the room, a heartbeat of sound in the deep. He heard something, a faint echo, different, not from the convoy. He frowned. "Captain, I've got something at bearing 215. Could be a contact." The ship's captain, Commander Arthur Blake, walked over, calm but focused. He'd been chasing submarines since the war began. He trusted his instincts and his crew. "Hold course. Let's verify it," Blake ordered. For minutes, they listened, the sonar pulses bouncing through the dark water. Then, a sharper echo came back. Metal. Moving. Blake's expression hardened. "It's a U-boat," he turned to his men. "Sound, general quarters. All hands to battle stations." A siren wailed across the deck. Men ran to their posts, loading depth charges, checking the guns, watching the sea for any sign of the invisible enemy below. Below, in the submarine, the crew heard it too, the faint hum of propellers getting closer. Wolf's eyes narrowed. "They've seen us," he muttered. "Dive! Dive!" The klaxon blared through the U-boat. Men rushed to their stations. Valves hissed. The boat angled down sharply. The lights flickered as they sank deeper into the darkness, at 90 meters, then 110, then 130. The sound of the destroyer above grew distant, replaced by the eerie creaking of pressure against steel. Wolf held his breath. His crew watched him silently, their faces pale in the dim red light. Then, boom, a distant explosion rolled through the hull. The first depth charge, then another, and another. Each one closer, each one louder. The submarine shuddered like a living thing in pain. Pipes rattled, bolts groaned. One man crossed himself, whispering a prayer. Wolf clenched his jaw. They'd been hunted before, but never like this. Up above, Commander Blake stood on the bridge, scanning the waves. "Set depth charges to 150 meters. Prepare for another run." The destroyer banked sharply, circling back over the patch of ocean where the sonar contact had vanished. The men on deck could feel the tension, the mix of fear and fury that came with fighting an unseen enemy. Blake gripped the railing. "Let's finish this one," he said coldly. The HMS Stalwart roared forward, propellers churning white water as the crew prepared another deadly drop. And down below, trapped beneath 1,000 tons of seawater, the German crew braced for impact, each man knowing this could be his last breath. Then the captain whispered, "Hold steady. Wait. They're coming back." And the ocean held its breath with them. The sea was black and infinite, the kind of darkness that swallowed ships whole. Down below, inside the U-boat, every man could feel the weight of the ocean pressing in. The lights flickered as the submarine creaked under the pressure. Sweat trickled down their necks despite the freezing cold. Each breath tasted like oil and fear. Captain Heinrich Wolf stood by the periscope column, his gloved hands gripping the metal tight. He could hear the destroyer circling above, its propellers rumbling like thunder. He turned to his first officer, Oberleutnant Klaus Ritter, and said quietly, "They're not giving up. We've been detected." Ritter's jaw tightened. "What's the plan, sir?" Wolf took a long breath. "We go silent. All engines stop. No movement. No noise." The order went through the narrow corridors. The diesel engines sputtered to silence. The U-boat became a drifting tomb in the deep. For a few seconds, the only sound was the slow drip of condensation and the distant heartbeat of the crew. Above, on HMS Stalwart, sonar operator Lieutenant Hale sat motionless. The The sonar pings echoed through his headphones. Ping, silence. Ping, silence. He frowned. Captain, contact lost. They've gone quiet. Commander Blake didn't look surprised. That's what they always do, but we'll wait them out. He walked to the bridge windows, looking out at the dark waves. He'd spent too many nights like this, staring into black water, trying to guess where death was hiding. Helm, maintain position. Engines to half speed. Keep sonar sweeping. Hours passed. The ocean seemed frozen in time. Rain began to fall, tapping against the steel deck of the destroyer. Men stood by the rails, peering into the mist, knowing that somewhere beneath them, 40 enemy sailors were holding their breath. Inside the U-boat, the silence was unbearable. Every creak of the hull sounded like a scream. Wolf sat on the edge of the command seat, whispering, "Come on, move away." But the destroyer didn't move. It hovered above them like a vulture. The oxygen was growing thin. Men were breathing faster, sweating more. Condensation dripped from the ceiling in steady drops. Ritter whispered, "Sir, if we stay down much longer, we'll suffocate." Wolf didn't answer right away. He stared at the depth gauge. 140 meters. Prepare for silent ascent. Very slow. 1 meter every 10 seconds. The submarine rose through the blackness. Every man held his breath, afraid that the noise of the ballast tanks would give them away. Up above, Lieutenant Hale straightened suddenly. "Captain, faint contact returning. Bearing 235. It's rising." Commander Blake's eyes flashed. "Got you." He grabbed the intercom. "All hands. Prepare for attack run." The destroyer accelerated, cutting through the waves like a predator. The sound of her engines roared across the sea. Below, Wolf's heart sank. "They heard us. Crash dive! Crash dive!" The submarine tilted downward again. Men stumbled, grabbing pipes for balance. Then the first depth charge hit. Boom! The lights went out. Sparks flew. A pipe burst, spraying seawater into the control room. The hull screamed under the pressure. Men shouted, coughing in the smoke and oil. "Damage report," Wolf yelled. "Flooding in compartment 3, someone shouted back. Ritter ran to seal the hatch. Water poured in as he slammed it shut, locking 2 men on the other side. Their pounding fists echoed for a moment, then silence. Wolf's eyes went dark. He knew what that silence meant. Up above, HMS Stalwart completed her second attack run. The deck shook from the release of depth charges. The ocean erupted in fountains of white spray and fire. Lieutenant Hale shouted over the noise, "Multiple explosions, sir! Contact fading!" Blake watched the water churn. "Hold position. Let's confirm the kill." For minutes there was nothing, just smoke and mist. Then a slick of oil rose to the surface, and bubbles. "Looks like we got them," Hale said quietly. Blake didn't smile. He'd seen too many kills that weren't really over. He watched, waiting for wreckage, waiting for proof. And deep below in the half-flooded submarine, Captain Wolf coughed through the smoke and whispered, "Not yet." The ocean was chaos. Depth charges thundered like angry gods beneath the surface. Inside the crippled U-boat, men scrambled through smoke, steam, and rising water. The smell of diesel fuel and burning insulation filled every corner. Captain Wolf steadied himself against the bulkhead, coughing violently. He could barely see through the haze. "Report," he shouted. Ritter's voice cracked through the chaos. "Batteries destroyed. Compartment 3 is sealed. 2 men trapped." "Leave it," Captain Wolf said quietly. His face was hard, but his voice trembled. "Pump out the flooding. We're not done yet." He staggered toward the helm, gripping the metal handrails slick with oil. The submarine groaned, a wounded beast trying to stay alive. "Prepare torpedo tubes 1 and 2, he said. "If they want to hunt us, let's give them something to find." Above them, HMS Stalwart was circling, sonar pinging rhythmically. The men on deck waited for the sea to calm, for the oil to spread wider, proof of a sinking. But the sonar operator frowned. "Sir, I've got movement." Blake turned sharply. "Movement? From where?" "Directly below us. Heading up." Blake's instincts flared. "They're coming up. Engines full ahead. Bring us around for ramming course." The destroyer roared forward, slicing the waves. Its bow rose and fell with the swell, the lights of the bridge glowing faintly in the mist. Below, Captain Wolf stood steady, staring at the periscope. Through the cracked lens, he saw the faint shadow of the destroyer turning. He whispered, "They're coming for us." Ritter's eyes widened. "Sir, what do we do?" Wolf looked at the flooded floor, the trembling men, the smoke curling from the vents. He smiled bitterly. "We go up. One last breath." He shouted, "Surface the boat!" The ballast tanks roared. Air hissed. The submarine began to rise. Fast. The dark sea broke apart as the U-boat burst through the surface, light water cascading from its hull. Its conning tower rose like a black monster out of the waves. But HMS Stalwart was already charging toward it, engines screaming, bow cutting the water like a blade. On the bridge, Commander Blake yelled, "Hold course! Impact in 30 seconds!" Men held their breath, some gripped the rails, others whispered prayers. On the U-boat, sailors rushed to the deck, waving white rags, screaming surrender, but the storm drowned their voices. Wolf stood at the hatch, watching the destroyer bear down on them. He didn't move. He knew it was too late. Then, impact. The destroyer's bow slammed into the side of the submarine with a roar that shook the sea. Metal tore like paper. The U-boat rolled violently, half-submerged. Men were thrown to the freezing water, screaming. The ocean turned red with fuel and blood. From the bridge of HMS Stalwart, Blake could see the wreckage burning on the waves. He shouted, "Cease engines! Prepare rescue boats!" But even as he said it, the sea beneath them began to churn again. The U-boat wasn't dead yet. Through the smoke, a torpedo hatch creaked open underwater, one last desperate move. The ocean was still burning. Pockets of oil floated like black mirrors, reflecting the orange fire of flares overhead. The cries of men filled the night, both German and British. But below that chaos, in the shattered belly of the U-boat, something still moved. Ritter coughed violently, dragging himself through knee-deep water. The control room was tilted, wires sparking, steam hissing through ruptured pipes. Most of the crew were gone, dead or thrown overboard. But in the dim red emergency light, Captain Wolf was still alive. "Status!" he gasped. Ritter's trembling hands reached the controls. Tube 1, still operational, pressure stable. Wolf's eyes lit with something between madness and duty. "One shot," he whispered. "One last sting before we die." He limped toward the console, blood dripping from a cut across his forehead. "Flood tube 1. Set depth to shallow. Target, destroyer." Ritter hesitated. "Sir, they're rescuing our men." Wolf looked at him, eyes hollow, voice cracked. "War doesn't end because someone shows mercy. Fire the torpedo." Ritter's lips quivered. "Jawohl, Herr Kapitän." A metallic clunk echoed through the dying sub as the torpedo slid into position. Water rushed, the hydraulics screamed, and then silence. A single red light blinked. Wolf whispered, "Fire." A burst of compressed air launched the last weapon of U-5V7 into the black water. The torpedo shot forward, geese slicing silently toward the surface light of HMS Stalwart. Above, the destroyer's crew was lowering lifeboats. Men shouted orders over the wind, hauling ropes, pulling half-conscious sailors from the water. Commander Blake stood on the bridge, scanning the wreckage through his binoculars. He saw faces, terrified, cold, begging for help. He turned to his first officer. "Lower another boat. We save who we can." But then, a voice cut through the noise. "Sir, sonar contact. Fast-moving object." Blake froze. "What bearing?" 215, it's coming straight for us." Blake's eyes widened. He didn't even hesitate. "All engines reverse. Hard to port." The destroyer roared, propellers churning the sea white. Men stumbled on deck, shouts turning to screams. The torpedo sliced through the waves, its metal nose glinting under the flare light. And then, a violent explosion erupted off the port bow. Water erupted skyward like a mountain. The ship shuddered, the hull bending, alarms blaring. The bridge lights flickered. Smoke poured from the engine room. Blake grabbed the rail, barely keeping his footing. "Damage report," he shouted. "Engine room hit, flooding aft compartment." But the officer paused. "It didn't hit us directly, sir. The torpedo detonated early." Blake exhaled, a shaky breath of disbelief. "By God, we were lucky." He turned his binoculars back toward the sea, but where the U-boat had been, there was only fire and oil. No movement, no men, only the waves reclaiming the wreck. Minutes later, rescue boats returned, filled with shivering survivors, both British and German. Some were silent, others sobbing. Blake watched as his crew pulled men from the freezing water, even those wearing enemy uniforms. He muttered quietly, "They fought bravely, but the sea doesn't take sides." As dawn broke over the Atlantic, the fire died down, leaving only a slick trail of oil across the water. The destroyer, scarred but afloat, turned slowly toward home. Behind her, the ocean carried the ghosts of two crews, enemies, bound forever in salt and steel. The sun began to rise, pale and cold, over an ocean that looked as if it had bled through the night. Smoke drifted across the surface, forming thin, ghostly veils between the waves. Everywhere, debris floated, wood, metal, and the lifeless shapes of men who had fought until the sea took everything from them. On the deck of HMS Stalwart, the mood was silent. No cheering, no pride, just exhaustion. The men who had pulled survivors from the water sat slumped against the rails, like hands trembling from cold and adrenaline. Commander Blake walked among them, his boots echoing softly on the steel. He stopped beside a lifeboat that had just been hoisted aboard. Inside were 5 German sailors, wrapped in blankets, faces pale and hollow. One of them, Ritter, looked up slowly. His lips were cracked, his eyes bloodshot, but he met Blake's gaze with something almost like relief. Blake knelt beside him. "You were on that submarine?" Ritter nodded weakly. Yes. U-557. I was radio officer. Blake studied him for a moment. He expected hatred or defiance, but there was only emptiness. Your captain? Blake asked. Ritter swallowed hard. Dead. He stayed on board till the end. Blake nodded slowly, the weight of it heavy on his face. Then he died like a sailor, he said quietly, fighting the sea, not just us. As the morning grew brighter, the destroyer's doctor worked frantically, treating burns and frostbite. Some of the Germans lay side by side with British sailors, enemies a few hours ago, now breathing the same ragged air. One of the crewmen whispered, "Never thought I'd be holding a Kraut's hand so he wouldn't freeze to death." The doctor just said, "Out here, the sea doesn't care who you are, it just wants you." Ritter was later brought to the wardroom for questioning. He sat across from Blake, hands still shaking, a cup of tea untouched in front of him. Blake said, "Tell me, why did your captain fire that last torpedo? You were already defeated." Ritter stared down at the table for a long time. Then he said quietly, "He believed surrender was shame. He said, if we must die, then we take one of you with us." He was a man of pride, too much pride. Blake looked away, jaw tight. He'd seen that kind of pride before, on both sides. It was the kind that killed men long after the shooting stopped. He finally said, "War turns good men into ghosts before they even die." Ritter looked up, eyes glistening. "You saved us," he said softly. "Why?" Blake didn't answer right away. He looked out the porthole at the gray waves stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Then he said, "Because we're not fighting the sea, son. We're just trying not to drown in it." That night, HMS Stalwart continued her slow journey home. The engines hummed low, the waves gentle for the first time in days. In the wardroom, the rescued Germans slept side by side with the British crew. No one spoke. Outside, the ocean reflected the stars, thousands of them, shimmering across the black water, and somewhere beneath that same sea, the wreck of U-557 rested in silence, its final breath forever sealed in steel. When HMS Stalwart finally reached port, the sea was calm, too calm, like it had swallowed the truth along with the wreckage. The harbor workers watched in silence as the battered destroyer pulled in. Her hull was dented, paint scorched, and the flag at her stern hung heavy with salt. No music played, no brass bands waited, only the quiet sound of ropes being thrown and tied. Commander Blake stepped off the gangway, uniform stiff with dried seawater. He didn't look like a man returning victorious. He looked like someone who had seen too much. An officer from Naval Intelligence met him at the dock. "Commander Blake," he said briskly, "Admiralty wants a full report. You'll be debriefed within the hour." Blake nodded without a word. He already knew what that meant. Another room, another table, another set of men in suits who'd never smelled diesel or blood in their lives. The debriefing room smelled of ink and smoke. Behind the desk sat 3 senior officers and 1 civilian from the Ministry of Information. They asked questions that sounded rehearsed. How did contact with the U-boat begin? What were your orders? Was ramming the vessel intentional? Blake's answers were short, precise, but his eyes betrayed him. When he finished describing the torpedo attack and the rescue of German survivors, the civilian leaned forward. "You rescued enemy sailors, Commander?" Blake looked at him evenly. "Yes, they were drowning. We had room." The man frowned. "You do realize how that looks to the press? The people expect their navy to destroy the enemy, not feed them." Blake's jaw clenched. "With respect, sir, the sea doesn't read your newspapers." One of the senior admirals cleared his throat sharply. "That's enough, Commander. This report will remain classified." Outside, the wind blew hard across the docks. Blake lit a cigarette, staring at the gray water. Ritter, the German radio officer, was standing a few yards away, handcuffed but alive, waiting to be taken to a POW camp. Their eyes met briefly. Neither man spoke, but in that silent glance was something like understanding. Both had survived, not because of skill, not because of orders, but because the sea had allowed it. Weeks later, in a small naval archive, a typist filed away the report. Incident: sinking of U-557 by HMS Stalwart, July 1943. Status: engagement successful. No loss of vessel, no mention of the rescue, no mention of the torpedo that almost struck, no mention of the men who pulled their enemies from the sea. The truth was buried, not under the waves this time, but under paperwork. That night, Blake sat alone in his quarters. He opened his logbook and wrote one last entry. "The sea is not our enemy. It only reflects what we bring to it. Some bring courage, others fear. But when it looks back at you, it always shows the truth." He closed the book, blew out the lamp, and sat in the dark, listening to the distant call of gulls and the endless rhythm of the tide. 20 years had passed. The world had changed, but the ocean hadn't. It still stretched endlessly toward the horizon, gray, cold, and silent. Commander Blake was no longer in uniform. His hair had turned silver, his back slightly bent. He now walked with a cane, the rhythm of each step matching the slow roll of the tide. He stood on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic, the same waters where HMS Stalwart had rammed U-557. The wind was sharp, carrying the faint scent of salt and seaweed. Below, the waves crashed gently against the rocks, timeless and indifferent. He took a deep breath and whispered, "It still smells the same." In his hand, he held a small, rusted object, a piece of metal salvaged years later from the wreck of the U-boat. He'd kept it in a drawer all that time, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that even in victory, there's loss, and that in the sea, there are no true enemies, only men caught in a storm they didn't start. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he was there again. The sound of the engines, the alarms, the screams, the flash of fire across the waves, the faces of his crew, the terrified eyes of the German sailors, and that endless ocean swallowing everything. He opened his eyes to the present. Beside him stood a young naval officer, barely 25, wearing the crisp uniform of a new generation. "Sir," the young man said softly, "is it true you were there? The U-boat incident?" Blake smiled faintly. "People still talk about it?" "Yes, sir. They say you rammed the enemy without hesitation, that it was one of the bravest acts of the war." Blake chuckled quietly. "Bravery? No, it was fear. Fear and instinct. We were all just trying to survive." The young officer hesitated. "Do you regret it?" Blake looked out over the endless sea. The wind caught his coat, and for a moment, he seemed carved out of the same gray stone as the cliffs. He said, "I regret that it ever had to happen at all." They stood in silence. Below them, the waves whispered against the shore like voices from the past. And then, far out at sea, a gull cried, a long, mournful sound that faded into the wind. Blake turned to leave, but before he did, he tossed the rusted fragment into the ocean. It spun once in the sunlight before disappearing beneath the surface forever. He whispered, "Rest easy, boys, both sides." Then he walked away, the sound of his footsteps fading, leaving only the sea, vast, eternal, and remembering everything.